Do you ever wonder if your one-on-ones are worth the time investment or exactly what you should be doing during your one-on-ones? Well, one-on-ones are such an important part of a manager's job. So today, we're digging into how to make all of your one-on-ones valuable for you and your people. Today's guest is Dr. Stephen Rogelberg. Stephen is an organizational psychologist and holds the distinguished title of Chancellor's Professor at UNC Charlotte. His new book, Glad We Met: The Art and Science of One-on-One Meetings, was designated as a top 12 book by SHRM. He and his work have been featured on CBS Sunday, CNN, MSN, HBR, WSJ, and BBC World, to name just a few. Adam Grant has called Stephen the world's leading expert on meetings. If you find this conversation valuable, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. New content is released every Tuesday. Now here's the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stephen. I have to say, as a fellow meeting enthusiast, it's always a pleasure to have another meeting expert on my show. So thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm really happy to be here. Always enjoy talking about meetings.
I know. I feel like we're like the rare breed in this world of people who actually enjoy talking about meetings.
Oh, I think there's people who like talking about meetings in the form of complaints and grousing. I think that's really common. Obviously my focus is on how we can use science to fix this problem.
Fair enough. Okay. So we're going to specifically talk about a particular type of meeting, the one-on-one, which is a meeting that, as you lay out in your book with all the research, is one of the most common meetings that managers have to have all the time. So can you explain, how do you define what a one-on-one meeting is?
That's a perfect question. So basically, we have tons of one-on-one encounters at work or everywhere, really. My focus is on a particular type of one-on-one. This is a one-on-one between a manager and their directs. This is a regular occurring meeting where it's facilitated and orchestrated by the manager, but it is not for them. It is for the direct. It is for the direct to share what's on their mind, their concerns, their thoughts on topics ranging from well-being to their job, to the team, to the organization, to their careers. It is a meeting fundamentally designed to see your people.
Say more about that.
We think about, obviously, going back to this notion that, we constantly are working with and through others to advance the ball, right? To work together. This is a meeting where you are just connecting with the other party in a meaningful and genuine way. It's a meeting where you are committing yourself as a manager to say, listen, I'm going to carve this time out. We're going to do it every week or every other week. And it is a commitment that's aligned with my values and my hopes and aspirations as a leader. And we're going to go into this meeting and this is your opportunity to share and to get the support that you need. And I'm going to be there for you. All those types of conversations is just about elevating the humanity and the connection between that person. So when I talk about this notion of truly seeing someone, that kind of encapsulates that all, right? We can go through our work days, and managers do this all the time, where we're just constantly running and moving. And then we get surprised when someone leaves. Well, they often leave because they don't feel seen, right? We know the adage that people don't fully leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. Well, these one-on-ones are the opportunity to prove that you're not a bad boss.
Ooh, I love that. I'm curious when you say that this is the meeting for the employee, right? And that they are really, this is serving their needs. What does that mean for us in terms of our role in that meeting? Like, are we supposed to be preparing things? Are we supposed to kind of just turn it over to them and we just show up and be present and good listeners?
Definitely present and good listeners, but there's more to it, right? You are orchestrating it. You are connecting with the director. You're providing the guardrails and the structure. You're creating the expectations and the hopes. You're setting the stage. So you are an active facilitator. You don't have a passive role. But yeah, the things that should be coming out of your mouth the most are things like, help me understand, tell me more. How can I help? How can I support? And so you're very much dialed into the dynamics of the conversation. as you know, I wrote this book, Glad We Met, The Art and Science of One-on-One Meetings. And so I try in the book to really capture the importance of the activity and leverage science everywhere we can, so leaders can start making evidence-based choices on how to conduct these. And one finding that I think is so interesting is this idea that as the manager's proportion of time they speak increases in one-on-ones, ratings of effectiveness decrease. So the more the manager talks, the worse these meetings are. And so the hope is that the manager is creating an environment to really encourage the direct to speak. I mean, remember, managers have a million different ways of checking in on their people, asking for meetings with their people. Like, they have the power, right? So they can do these things. This is a dedicated time to do something different. This is a small investment to demonstrate to your people that you're willing to carve out time to focus on them. And interestingly, you might have some, listeners say, oh, wow, I don't have time to do this. But the fact is, you have to. And investing in this way actually makes time. And there's a couple mechanisms for that. One is that we found in our work that managers who were doing these regular one-on-ones the proper way actually reported having less interruptions throughout the weeks, because people just kept the topics for the actual one-on-one. So managers felt like they could actually get more work done because they had opportunities for flow. That's one thing. But the second thing is actually much more compelling, that one-on-ones improve the performance of your directs and your teams. It's well documented in the literature. When your people are performing well, it's a reflection on you. Managers are evaluated based on the success of their people and their teams. So you're making time, but you are benefiting tremendously from it. Not to mention the fact that, well, I guess I am mentioning it, not so that when you do one-on-ones, your employees are much more engaged. In fact, a Gallup study found it was 3 times as much engagement levels as those who weren't experiencing regular one-on-ones. And when people are engaged, they're more productive. They help each other more. They're actually more safe on the job. They don't leave the job as readily. And think about how long it takes you to replace top talent. So ultimately, just to kind of wrap it up in that, is bringing this little extra humanity into the workplace is good from a values and joy perspective, but it's also, the business case is extremely clear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important that this is the job of the manager, right? Like, while you have many other things you're doing that are other sometimes individual work you have to do and leading projects and things like that, supporting your people to do their work, that's actually your unique job. So
it is like,
not only good.
It is your job. When I give speeches around this and I say, I'm going to make the case for the one-on-one, but in some regards, it doesn't matter because you have to do this. This is literally your job. This is how you display leadership. And then, when we think about it, as we move away from the pandemic years, these are the interactions people missed, right? It was these moments of connection, meaningful connection. That's what we missed. And, the other thing that I often tell managers is, take a moment and visualize when someone with power took a genuine interest in you. How did it affect you? And we can find those incidents and we remember them, right? They were transformative. They led us to be more committed and engaged and to persevere, more aligned. And so the bottom line is yeah, as you said beautifully, this is what good managers do. And I'll end it with this, is that imagine if you don't do it. What does that signal to your people? Right? So we often forget that our behaviors are constantly signaling who we are to others. When you don't do these, you are signaling. Even when it's not coming out of your mouth, you are signaling the end of the day, you don't really care, right? You're not willing to find that time to truly elevate others. And that's not going to work well for you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, so let's talk a little bit about what are the questions that we should be asking in these meetings, especially if our job here is to ask the questions and then try not to talk too much, but really to listen and to elevate and to build that relationship. What are some of the different kinds of questions that we should be asking?
What we know from the research is that these meetings do need a lightweight agenda, and that they were evaluated most effectively when there was some plan of action. The research also suggested strongly that the most compelling agenda is the one that's created by the direct, right? Because this is a meeting for them. So the more involved they are in the construction of that plan, the better. So there's something called the core question approach, where a leader says, hey, here are my 4 or 5 core questions. And then there's a discussion around them. The questions are so broad and general, right? What are your biggest challenges you're facing right now, and how can I help? Right? They're so broad that even though the manager's asking them, the direct can go any number of ways. So the core question approach, and you can rotate core questions. You can ask the directs to share core questions that they would like to have, but there's lots of different core questions, and I'll circle back on that. The other approach is the listing approach. And in the listing approach, the manager tells their direct, hey, this meeting is for you. I want it to be maximum value to you. So I'd like you to generate a list of questions or topics that you want to discuss in this one-on-one. But don't bring up things you think I want to hear. This is for you. So reflect on your job, the team, the organization, think short-term, think long-term, and create your list and bring it with you to the meeting. So those are kind of the 2 strategies for the kind of the structure. The questions that someone asks, I mean, there's so many choices, and ideally we want to rotate different questions over time so that the discussion stays stimulating and interesting. I mean, questions like, just where you try to get to know each other better, both from a personal as well as a work perspective, questions about well-being and engagement, questions, that are kind of checking in on the person, questions around roadblocks or challenges or concerns, questions around the team or the culture, questions around communication needs, feedback needs, questions around their own personal development, questions around how they feel they're aligning and coordinating with others. Those are all really fair game. But really the key is to keep this fresh and to constantly ask new questions. Like you can have your core set of questions, but see where it goes. And again, don't be afraid to let the employee decide what key questions should be asked.
I feel like it's very helpful to have those kind of buckets and frameworks of thinking through different kinds of questions to ask so that you can keep it fresh and keep cycling through. Are there any questions that you say, like, you should absolutely ask this every single time? Like, just, you should always start with a, like, how are you doing question, or you should always start with a, like, what's a challenge? How can I help you with that challenge? Anything that should always be there?
The research hasn't yielded any kind of magic question per se, but there's certain questions that just make sense, right? So the question, how are you? However, we need to ask that question differently. The question, how are you, sadly doesn't work. When we ask someone, how are you, they typically rely on just automatic responses. I'm fine. I'm good. That actually doesn't give you real information to work with. But if we ask someone, I'm interested in how you are, but I'd like you to answer on a 10-point scale with 1 being horrible, 10 being great. How are you? And then now you'll get different responses. You'll get 5s, 6s, 7s. And now you can say things like, tell me more. Why are you a 6? Another follow-up is, what can I do to help you become an 8? Right? So having more meaningful data when you ask, how are you, can help tremendously. And then I think if I had to go to a second core question that's a must, is the one you shared, right? So what are the biggest challenges you're experiencing, and how can I support you? That's the bread and butter. You do those 2 questions and do them right, you're hitting, you're getting far with not much.
Nice. Okay. That makes it very easy. Okay. What about using the time to ask questions about yourself? Could I do something differently as your manager? Could I support you better? Like, Is this an opportunity for managers to get feedback also, or is that now flipping it onto being about me instead of being about my direct report?
Yes, those things absolutely can happen. A manager can ask for feedback on particular things or initiatives they have in mind, but that should not be the top priority. And once we roll out one-on-ones, we don't want to go there right away, right? But if you have a good track record of investment in those one-on-ones and it's working well, you absolutely can start to flex to add some opportunities where the direct can provide maybe you with some critical information and feedback. But yeah, we don't want to lead with that. And we want to make sure that ultimately they're providing feedback and information that makes you be a better manager in such a way that it benefits them, right? Because we want to make sure we keep our eye on the ball that way. We also need to be sensitive that a manager asking their direct to provide feedback to them is kind of tricky. There's such a huge power differential. But if you've established safety and trust and you've committed yourself to elevating that other party, you can create the foundation where those types of things do happen.
Absolutely. I ask my direct report all the time, what could I do differently to make your life easier? Right. And it's not asking for feedback like, what am I doing that's so terrible? But it's like, is there something I could do differently that would make your life easier? And she has told me plenty of things, which I always appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, clearly she trusts you and she knows that you want that information. You're going to take it seriously. And that's pretty awesome.
And she also knows I don't always implement everything she says, but
it's
fine. Always helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. I mean, and the thing is, people forget that, we can't always enact all the feedback we get, but we can tell people why we couldn't do something.
Yes.
Right. So if we can't do something, we just have to close the loop. A lot of people don't realize that that's a necessary second step. Because if you don't do that, then people make different attributions.
Absolutely. Is that another piece to the one-on-one? Like, should we be following up with things that came out of a previous one-on-one and trying to use that time to also close the loop? Or is that for separate things?
My favorite opening questions are, besides the how are you one that I shared, the other one is, hey, I know you were working on X from our last meeting. How'd that go? I think that's a really powerful question because it conveys that you listened and that you're prepared for this meeting. We just don't want this new meeting to become a rehash of the previous one. So we just have to be careful and, just frame it as, hey, I just want to do a quick follow-up. If the employee wants to just spend time talking about it, that's fine, as long as it's their choice.
That makes sense. Okay. And what about feedback for the employee? Is this an opportunity for us to give them feedback, or should we be saving those for feedback conversations?
I think if there's natural opportunities to provide feedback, that would be ideal. But again, it might not be the place to provide feedback. But managers have plenty of opportunities to provide feedback. They have the power, they have the control. But if an employee tees up something and it does look like a nice opportunity, the manager say, hey, would you like me to share some feedback on what I observed? And so they frame it as a question. And anytime you have feedback, if you can frame it first as a question, people are going to be much more receptive to the conversation. And so, yeah, if there's opportunities, the manager can certainly provide feedback. And the feedback is just follows the best practices, being behavioral, being specific, not making it personal, really framing and trying to understand the situation. So feedback done well is easy to receive. It's when feedback is done poorly, is where you get that resistance.
Yeah. Well, and I can imagine that if feedback is hard for you to give, or if it's not a clear, tee up in the conversation, that giving feedback too frequently in a one-on-one might make your direct report start to not enjoy these one-on-ones. And so you definitely don't want to turn them off of that opportunity.
Nope. That's a great conclusion. And, this meeting does not preclude team meetings. This does not preclude sending emails. This does not preclude performance assessments. This is just something different. And it absolutely could be a place where feedback and performance is talked about if that's what the employee asks. And when you've developed a nice track record with the employee, it's very likely they're going to say, hey, what do you think I'm doing well and not so well on? Right? That's going to be a compliment to you. And they will get there. If you're doing these right and you're creating safety and you're following through with commitments, People will ask you for your feedback. They won't ask you for the feedback if they fundamentally don't trust you.
Absolutely. So, what are other questions we should avoid asking that might make our team member feel super uncomfortable or could come across as self-serving in a way that just doesn't feel like we're following through on our request that this meeting is about them?
The main one, it's so big that it's status updates. That's the most common mistake managers make. They go in there and they basically say, hey, give me a rundown. What's going on with A, what's going on with B, what's going on with C, what's going on with D. Here are the metrics. I see you're tracking this way. What's going on? That's the stuff we want to avoid. We can have those conversations, but again, this is different. And so a manager who just gets it's into that status update mindset, they have to remind themselves that's meeting their needs, not the employee's needs. And if they ask good questions, the stuff's going to come up anyway, right? Because if they say, hey, I know you're working on X, Y, and Z, anything I can do to help on that? Have you had any particular problems that you might need me to jump in on that could be valuable? So you're going to get your status update of sorts. But we just want to make sure that the employee just can own this. I mean, remember, employees are at work, either remote or in person, let's say 35, 40 hours a week. They don't have, of all that window, it's hard to find periods of time where it's purely someone else focusing on how they're doing. Is it that much to ask for when we would want it, right? So one of the things I think is really interesting in the data is that when you ask people, do you want these one-on-one meetings, no matter how busy they are, they say, yeah, a properly conducted one-on-one meeting, that is a gift. I absolutely would want one. And even if they have tons of other meetings, this is the one meeting that should not be an email. And just constantly circling back to kind of how we started, this notion of being seen. Like, this is all tied to that.
Given that importance and how much people want these meetings, do you have a rule of thumb on how frequently we should be having them and how long they should last?
The research does. The research is pretty clear. So first of all, when you ask people their preferences, the preference actually is weekly. And by the way, senior people actually wanted them even more than junior folks. So the preference is weekly or every other week. When you look at the data finds that you get the most gains from weekly. When you go to every other week, you still get tons of gains, but just not as much. But it totally is fine. Once you start to move to monthly, you don't get those same gains. It's better than nothing, but you just don't get momentum, right? It makes a one-on-one to an event as opposed to a process. So monthly really isn't the sweet spot. Interestingly, I don't have data to suggest that the amount of time matters per se, that it's all about quality of the minutes, not quantity of the minutes. And so if you have 25 really good minutes, even if it's every other week, and they're really good, that's working. That's working. So 60 minutes that you're not other focused is not going to work. So I encourage managers to flex and to find what fits them. Being a scholar, a researcher, entitling the book Art and Science of One-on-One Meetings is hard for me to do, right? Because I'd rather just say the science of one-on-one meetings. But there is some art to this. And so people have to make choices that ultimately fit them. And that's fine, because there isn't any magic formula that appears to exist. There's lots of different paths to success if the fundamental orientation of being other focused remains.
I mean, it's so nice to hear that there's no perfect formula, because it means that we can make it work for us and for our team members. And we don't have to be so precise to fit into some particular structure that might not feel right for us, and we can really make it work. I'm wondering if you have any stories from your research or from your work that folks who've implemented a one-on-one process like this and how it's really rolled out for them.
It's not rocket science. When we can all connect with meaningful moments, meaningful conversations. Like everyone can remember what it feels like to have meaningful moments and connections. And talking to various leaders who have, kind of rebooted this and made the commitment, I just often hear like this notion that, yeah, the team came together. I finally felt connected to the team, right? Because often managers don't feel genuinely connected. And so I think there's tons of really good anecdotal data and stories. But again, we have all of our own self stories. We can go back through all the various managers we've had, various friends we've had, and we can remember those people in our lives that were willing to dedicate time for us on our terms. Pretty powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I started first doing one-on-ones with my team members, and one of the first questions I asked was, what have you done in the past few weeks that you are really proud of? And it was
Great.
fascinating to hear from my team members the things that they cared about, because it was not necessarily the thing that I was most proud of them for doing, but it was the thing that they were most proud of themselves for doing. And I felt like I got a new insight into who each of these people are. And it's still one of the questions I throw into my rotations, because it's an incredible thing that shows that you care about this person, to your point about connecting with them as a human, and you get insight into them, and you then get to celebrate. Wow, that's an amazing win. Like, you can now pile on some gratitude and appreciation, which also just makes you look good as you're celebrating them. So yeah, they're just, it's a powerful process.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I agree completely. And I'll add, as you told this story, and we can see, the joy as you reflect on it, there's a whole bunch of research on life satisfaction and trying to identify the biggest predictors of life satisfaction. Well, it's not good health. It's not money. It's actually helping others. Helping others is the most robust predictor of life satisfaction. So when I heard your story and, you were making a connection, right? You were elevating that person and you were really helping them, right? You helped validate their experience. You helped them feel seen and heard. And all those things, they feed your own soul.
Completely.
So this is just one of those rare work activities that is phenomenal for humanity and phenomenal for business. How nice is that, right? We don't get many of those, and this is one of them.
Well, I think this is the perfect place for us to wrap up. So, Stephen, where can people learn more about you, get a copy of your book, and keep up with your work?
Definitely go to my website, StephenRogelberg.com, StephenRogelberg.com. I've really tried to make it into a massive repository of tools and information for people to navigate their one-on-ones and meetings better. Definitely there's links to my new book, Glad We Met, The Art and Science of One-on-One Meetings. I will plug that I'm so passionate around getting the science out around this. Every penny of my royalties is going to the American Cancer Society in honor of my sister-in-law. And so it's just about trying to help people. So I encourage people to check out the book if they want to get better at this critical activity, or buy the book if they want to help eradicate cancer.
Eradicate cancer and make better meetings. Love it. Thank you again for joining me today. Such a pleasure to chat about meetings.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.